Good morning, everybody. I'm Carl Frank, A&I Wealth Management. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got Ryan Bertrand here from Transamerica. It's going to be a great conversation understanding healthcare. I think a lot of us worry about the cost of healthcare and retirement, and we're going to get some facts about what that really looks like today. And good news as well as bad news. Ryan's a great presenter and has a really great balanced presentation for us. If you don't know, Ryan has joined Transamerica fairly recently. A couple of years ago, it looks like. 2011. Yeah, that's 12 years ago.
12 years ago.
It's been a long time. Before that, he was with Jackson, so he's got quite a bit of experience. Mostly what we like to do is ask him for photos of his twins who are 6 months old yesterday and stories. So he's a great guy, and he lives in my hometown of Evergreen. So, we're pretty fond of this guy. So I think you're going to really enjoy it today. And without further ado, Ryan Bertrand.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Carl. Thanks again for having me. It's interesting thinking back, going through my past in financial services. I've been in this industry for almost 25 years, and I started it just a stone's throw away from this office. So it's interesting to be back after that long, and also all the change that we've seen in our industry. As far as financial services is concerned, what I do on a day-to-day basis, I head up the advanced markets group at Transamerica. So we're a group of subject matter experts that deal with everything financial planning related. So very complicated things. We also, at one point, not that long ago, had a doctor on staff. You would never think of a financial services company, an insurance company, have a medical doctor on staff. We hired this individual, and he is the author of this presentation. So I can't think of someone who is better suited to write about healthcare costs and healthcare in general than Dr. Bill Lloyd, who wrote this. He recently retired, but I think as you go through, you'll see how meticulously researched this topic is, much more than I really ever could have done, but he did an excellent job. But I think there are a lot of trends coming to a confluence when we talk about healthcare costs, specifically healthcare costs later in life and around retirement, and some of the notions that we have around retirement and the way we spend our money as we enter that next phase of our life. And the first one I like to think about, because I know coming into the industry 25 years ago, there was a great analogy used. Actually, it was used pretty frequently, and some of you may be familiar with it. The analogy of retirement preparedness was built around this concept of a balanced three-legged stool. So the idea was, if I have this three-legged stool and all of the legs of the stool that form my ideal retirement are in equilibrium and are in balance, I'll have a pretty level, stable, solid stool. The problem is, 25 years ago, what was considered to be a stable retirement has changed. Today, when we look at what constitutes a stable retirement, our three legs of that stool have gotten out of whack, I would say. The first leg of that stool was defined benefit pension plans. So you're supposed to be able to get income from a defined benefit pension plan. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a defined benefit pension plan is, it's basically an employer funding your retirement for you. The onus is on them. You get checks that last as long as you do. It's their responsibility to make sure that money's there. The problem is, in the 1980s, this was very prevalent. This was the most common form of retirement savings in the U.S., constituting in the private sector 60 to 80% of people's retirement. They had access to these accounts, to these streams of income coming in. Looked very much like Social Security. Now you fast forward to today, you think about the percent of people that have access to a defined benefit pension plan in the private sector particularly. Does anyone want to guess the percent of people that have access to a defined benefit pension plan in the private sector as the sole bedrock of their retirement? 4%. 4%. So we've gone from 60 to 80% of people not having to worry about this in any regard whatsoever, all the responsibility shouldered onto their employer. And today, only 4% have that as an option. Now, where we've transitioned to is 401ks and private savings. So this is our responsibility to make sure that we fund these accounts and we have diligent spending habits, that we have this second leg of our three-legged stool funded well, and that's private savings. So you think about that second leg of the stool and how much people have saved for retirement. Does anyone want to guess? So think about the baby boomers, the people that are on the doorstep of retirement. What do you think the baby boomers have saved on average, according to the Transamerica Center for Retirement Services, heading into retirement? So the average retirement savings for the average baby boomer.
100,000.
You're really close. You're $2,000 off. $202,000 is what the average baby boomer has saved for retirement. Now you can think about whether that's a lot or not enough, but you do have to consider that that's supposed to last 20, 30, 40, 50 years in retirement. That's not a lot of money to head into that particularly long period of your life as the primary source of where you're going to draw income from if you don't have a defined benefit plan, which means that a lot of people are relying on that third leg of the stool. So the third leg of the stool is Social Security. And Social Security, I always call it the ubiquitous American retirement experience, because every retiree probably doesn't consider themselves retired until they start drawing for Social Security. Now, the thing about Social Security is this is an area where there's a lot of choice that comes into it, and we don't often make the right choices when it comes to filing for our Social Security benefits. Also, you put that in tandem with the thought around Social Security solvency, and all of a sudden the third leg of our stool, Social Security, doesn't look that great. Because we know from experience and looking at the statistics, the percent of people that actually file an optimal benefit when they do choose to take Social Security. Does anyone want to guess the percent of people that actually file an optimal benefit according to United Planners? 4%. So 96% of people are getting less from the system than if they have just approached it from a diligent standpoint, knowing what they're doing. Problem is a lot of them take it early. They take their benefit as early as they possibly can, mostly because there's just a check there. They don't put a lot of thought into it. Now, I'll also say that just because you're not filing an optimal strategy doesn't necessarily mean that you made the wrong choice. Because for personal circumstance, there are times where it may make sense for you to claim early. So even the idea of an optimal strategy is a little bit of a misnomer because it's different for everybody. So to put one cookie cutter on everyone filing for Social Security benefits, I think would be a mistake. But from a dollar standpoint, we can look at those people who didn't file optimally and identify how much money they left on the table. So United Planners actually did this when they did their analysis. And they did it in kind of a weird way. They looked at it from a national perspective, and they said, as a country, we're missing out on $3.4 trillion of retirement income just based on the way we file for Social Security benefits. Now they took that a step further because $3.4 trillion, that's a really weird number. Most people are never going to be able to comprehend even what $1 trillion is because it's such a large, weird thing. So per household, they break this down to $111,000 per household. So $111,000 would be meaningful income for anyone claiming Social Security benefits. So I think it's worthwhile to think about that and then also put Social Security into perspective when we talk about longevity and more importantly, how it impacts our healthcare costs, which is what we're talking about today. Because we look at our retirement and we have all of these different issues coming into play at probably the worst possible time. I would say our three-legged stool definitely is wobbly. Wouldn't be something you would want to sit on as a national level, but also that insecurity as it pertains to our national finances impacts individuals. Because we look at the demographics here and we're going through the glut of people making these decisions. Baby boomers. You look at the baby boomer demographic. This has rewritten the book as it pertains to financial planning. And for years, we've heard the same statistic of 10,000 people turning age 65 every single day. Now, the interesting thing is that's supposed to occur until 2029. And actually, we're right in the thick of it. More people are turning 65 today than ever before. So right now, we're actually at 12,000 turning age 65 every single day. You project this out, those people that are turning age 65, at some point they're going to be 70, they're going to be 75, they're going to be 80. They're going to age and they're going to have to understand the decisions that they're making today as it pertains to their retirement income, their health care, all the decisions as it pertains to aging, whether that be estate planning, how you want your care provided if something becomes bad, how chronic conditions are taken into consideration, all the out-of-pocket expenses that you're going to need to consider, how you're enrolling in Medicare, all this stuff comes to a focal point at around age 65. So with all these people making these decisions, and even if you're not 65, you could be 40, giving some of these some thought and how you're preparing today, especially on a savings standpoint, is worthy to do. So we'll go through the presentation. We'll talk about this in addition to people who have gone through retirement, how their spending has changed in retirement, and put into focus what healthcare costs mean to those individuals. And healthcare costs, we can look at this from a multifaceted perspective, and a lot of it is the estimates. It's really difficult to know what our actual healthcare costs are going to be because we're constantly throwing a dart at a dartboard to understand what our projected costs are going to entail. It's different for everybody. We have a lot of variables that we just don't know. The cost of healthcare from year to year escalates, increases. Sometimes it even goes down a little bit based on technological advancement and things of that nature. But I also think that that has to be taken into consideration. age does play a role in this. And I think our longevity as a society has a major influence on the healthcare situation itself. In fact, you could probably say that the drastic increase of life expectancy, which has increased over 81% in over a century, is mostly due to medical advancement. I like to break it down into something that's more meaningful to me. And I think the major revolution in longevity is due to basically beer, wine, and drinking. And there's actually some truth in that. There's a great book called Outlive. And basically the author of that book, he's looking at longevity and increases in longevity and figuring out what has caused this. And if you go back to the major influence on what's increased our longevity from being 29 over the course of human history to be 85 plus today, it's basic things. It's sanitation. It's antibiotics. It's mostly things that are very rudimentary. So when I look at and I say that alcohol is the reason that we're having longevity, it's because of microbiology. Louis Pasteur in 1857 wrote a seminal work on microbiology, and he was analyzing the influence of yeast fermenting sugar. So fermentation has played such a role, and basically it has created refrigeration. You think about food sanitation. Refrigeration was born out of people wanting to keep their beer cold. So now we have this weird thought about how fermentation and food management, sanitation has been born out of microbiology. And the question now becomes, where are we going to go from here? Because we've got the easy stuff taken care of, making sure things are clean, our water is sanitary, our food is sanitary, we have basic medicine. You could claim that the major changes in longevity have mostly been born out of those basic things. Where we are today is transitioning, because where we haven't made huge advancements are around some of the later stage chronic conditions that right now are shortening our lifespan. So what I mean by this, you think about cancer. The older you get, the propensity of having a cancer diagnosis or a stroke, for example. Medicine certainly has had advancement in cancer and stroke management. And even taking it a step further, think about Alzheimer's and dementia. How limited we are as far as treatments of those two specific conditions. When we start making advancements on those later end life chronic conditions, our life expectancy probably is going to catapult even further. However, it's going to have a price tag to it. And we already see that when we look at these cutting edge treatments and making sure that we have our finances in order as it pertains to all these different healthcare costs, in addition to the other facets of healthcare that we may have costs for, is certainly beneficial for us and our families. I think that's the other aspect of this that's oftentimes overlooked, is when we get into these later life healthcare situations, it's never just one person going through it. You have a catastrophic diagnosis, and it falls on the son, the daughter, the husband, the wife, and even siblings to make sure that the person is taken care of. So that all has to be brought into this. It isn't just these stated costs that are on the slide. It's all this other noise that's behind this that we have to be mindful of. Now, we look at people's concerns as they enter into retirement, and they're always the same. You can go back over the last 25 years, read any survey that asks this, and there's always number one and number two as far as the biggest concerns for retirees. And the number one and number two concerns are running out of money in retirement. And fundamentally, you think about that, it makes a lot of sense why that would be a concern, because the last thing you want to be in retirement is poor. You don't want to be destitute. You don't want to have a low account value. And number two, you recognize as you get older, you may be more prone to catastrophic diagnosis and health conditions. So being poor, being in poor health, they may switch as far as number one and number two are concerned, but they're always up in these top areas of concern. Now you'll see this isn't precluded to just retirees. The statistics on the screen are for all employees, and these are universal concerns. So it's not just people that are 65 thinking about this stuff. It's really everybody, and we have to be mindful of it. Now, to add fuel to the fire, and I know I have a lot of depressing statistics already on the state of finances in the United States, I'll pile on. You look at the average individual and what they have saved for retirement. This statistic says 135,000. But I promise you, if you run on Google and you type in average savings for retirement of an American, you're going to get a broad swath of different statistics. Some will be as low as $65,000. Some will be as high as $200,000. But I would say, is again, this is encapsulating all of the demographics, not just people on the doorstep of retirement, those that are in their younger ages. This is a statistic that's scary because we start to equate this into income. If we annuitize this on a monthly basis, we run that out, it's $600 per month that our private savings actually gets us. Now, also, there's still a limiting factor, and if you read about Washington and legislation, one of the major areas of legislation over the past 4 years is access to retirement savings. So there was an act called the Secure Act put into place, and then there was a follow-up addendum to it called Secure Act 2.0. It was targeted to increase the amount of access to retirement savings for Americans because the government recognizes that there's somewhat of a crisis as it pertains to being prepared for retirement. And what you consistently see is that still more than half of employers don't have retirement plans for their employees. And actually a third of people don't have any retirement savings whatsoever because one, they may not have access to it, and two, they just might not be disciplined enough to put money away for their retirement. Oftentimes we see people have an instant gratification effect where they want to put money towards their short-term goals to forsake their long-term benefit. And that's a perfect example of it. Most people probably take the thought that I'm just going to let Social Security do the heavy lifting. And we continue to see Social Security be a primary source of retirement income for people. So we can't overlook it just from that standpoint. If you were a gymnast and you were looking at Social Security, it would be a landing you have to stick because most people are relying on it that heavily. Also, we look at the median retirement income. For retirees, it's not a lifestyle of luxury. It's a lifestyle of necessity and sometimes poverty. We're looking at $29,000 as the average retirement income. So we have to understand that. That may not be your situation, but you may have family that are in that situation. And understanding how this impacts our healthcare costs and how we kind of parse this out becomes important because we know as people rely on Social Security as the primary source of their healthcare funds, that as they get older and their health starts to degrade, that it becomes a larger share of where they're spending their money. So here you can see the percentages that Social Security benefits play as it relates to their overall healthcare costs. And you can see we start out here at 45% in the beginning portion of retirement, but by the time we get to age 87, this is where it gets scary. 3/4 of our Social Security benefit is going just to healthcare expenses. That's an important conception. Our spending in retirement is by no means linear. Our healthcare expenses in retirement are by no means linear. It's going to vary for each individual person based on their lifestyle, based on how their healthcare expenses shape up in retirement, and based on just general luck in some circumstances. And we have to understand the different components that go into and shape what we spend our healthcare expenses on. And there's a whole grab bag of different things that we have to account for and budget for in this equation. If you look at most of it, this would be what Medicare is going to cover. These are our general premiums for Medicare, which everyone goes on when they retire or turn age 65. It's Medigap, dental policy, vision, which isn't included in original Medicare. We have to take that out of consideration. Or you can sign up for an Advantage plan, and all of those are included in that bucket. But these other things are things that aren't taken into consideration when we talk about Medicare, nor may they be in a commercial policy just in general. So out-of-pocket expenses are a big one, because these are the ones that escalate the actual cost of healthcare in retirement. Catastrophic healthcare costs we can never really account for. We need to be prepared for them, certainly, but we can't have a crystal ball and prognosticate them. And then long-term care is one people generally don't like thinking about. And actually there's a paradox in how they feel about this, understanding at some level that it may be a certainty for a lot of people, but doing nothing about it. So having a plan for long-term care would be the final area that we need to consider. And this is born out of maybe even a lifelong lack of attention to our own health. There are the modifiable risk factors that accumulate over someone's lifetime. So we look at Americans and we look at how unhealthy we are, our lack of physical activity, our poor health, nutrition, obesity, smoking, alcohol, the bad habits that we employ. These all start to degrade over time. And when we get into retirement, it's just built up to such a level that we see a lot of retirees and older individuals with large amounts of chronic conditions. And these chronic conditions, they come with a price tag. We have to recognize that. There's a cost to hypertension. There's a cost to diabetes, COPD. Dementia is another big one that a lot of people overlook. It's one of those scary things, the long goodbye, when we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia. I'll touch on that as we move forward, but that's an area where I think everyone should have people in their lives that understand what their directives are. It should be communicated, and it's something where you should have a great, well thought through plan for if things go wrong. And I think financial professionals, that's what their jobs are. They're there for when things go wrong and to build out the best possible plan to avoid potential catastrophes if this does happen to you or someone in your family. Now we'll shift gears a little bit. So we're going to look at retiree spending. Because this is one of those areas where people have this complexion and they've thought about retirement. And I think there's the wish list and then there's the reality. So we look at the wish list. You think about what people want to do in retirement. What do you think, by and large, people say they want to do in retirement? They want to travel. They want to travel. They want to see grandkids. They want to have fun. They want to enjoy that area of life that isn't encumbered by their day-to-day work. The problem comes in reality when we look at where people are actually spending their money in retirement. One, they may not have the resources to travel at the level that they do, but by and large, we tend to see a spending pattern where they enter retirement and they're gung-ho, and they may actually do some travel and take vacations and spend a lot of money in the beginning portion. It's the go-go years of retirement. And then we enter into the middle phase and we start to see the slow-go years of retirement. And at the very end, our spending actually overall on most things decreases, but we see them in the no-go stage of retirement. But we see here, this chart, what you're looking at is the blue. These are the things that people thought that they would spend on retirement and what they actually experienced. What you'll notice is the two things, food and dining, travel and entertainment. These are our two largest areas where people spent less that they anticipated. So these are the focal point of people as they're entering into retirement, but in reality, it's not what they're doing. These light blue bars, these are where we actually spent more. Now, what you'll see is most people spent less on most things than they actually anticipated, which I think is a good thing from a drawdown standpoint. Whether or not that added to their actual quality of life and enjoying their retirement could be debatable. But where they spent more predominantly, the two biggest outliers were on healthcare costs. And I think that makes a lot of sense. And you actually look at spending in retirement in general. And if we look at this retirement experiment that we've been going through since the 1970s with the passage of ERISA, moving from a defined benefit world of retirement into a defined contribution world of retirement, we can look back and see people's actual experiences. We're starting to see the first glimpses into how people have fared on a do-it-yourself retirement system. And depending on how you read this data, you can either look at it as a good news or a bad news slide. I think there's a lot of things that go into this. I think to table dress this a little bit, I'll use an anecdote. A few weeks ago, I went into a dry cleaner, and there was this lady in front of me at the dry cleaner, and she had an oxygen tank. She was much older. And I'm like, oh man, this is not the person I want to be behind. She had a bunch of stuff that she wanted to get dry cleaned, and she was picking the brain of the clerk. So she had these furs that she said she got from Hong Kong. And she was saying, I need to get these furs clean. I need to get them restored. How much are you going to charge? And the lady kept saying the charge, oh, that's just too much. I don't have that much money. I'm poor. I don't have that much money. So 15 minutes later, I'm still standing there. She walks out. I do my drop off my shirts, which takes me all but 20 seconds. I walk out. I see her getting in her car, and it's a 2-year-old Mercedes. This lady, even though she was haggling over dollars and cents with the dry cleaner lady, obviously was of means at some level. And my guess is probably had a couple long years, these last couple of years, and maybe felt a lot poorer than she actually was. Or maybe she was just trying to get a good deal from the dry cleaner. Who knows? But it kind of underlines what goes on with this statistic. And what happens is, as retirees are spending their money, they tend to match the income that they're spending to the resources that they have and the expenses that come up. So when things are bad, they spend less. When things are good, they might spend more and they might not. But generally, your income and your spending start to track. And it's because of that dynamic. We start to spend less when we have times where we feel like we're being poor. Sometimes we need permission to understand that we need to spend more. But we can look at this statistic and we can see in each wealth demographic that we really aren't that far behind on our drawdown. We're at about 75% for our two middle wealth demographics, and we're about 88% left for our well-to-do people. Now, what's interesting and not shown in this dynamic is people that have pensions, their drawdown is significantly less. They've only drawn down 4% of their retirement assets. The other demographic, the people that didn't have pensions, they're at 34% drawdown. They're actually lower than all of these shown. But I think it's interesting to think that sometimes we just need to take a step back and think, can I spend more? Do I have permission to spend more? And try to have the best possible retirement that you possibly can. And I think having financial professionals in your life to do that gives you the ability and confidence to have the life that you want in retirement. But we look at health expenses, and we look at the estimates behind it. And this is where it starts to get really intimidating, because we have a lot of different people throwing statistics out there and at what you may be spending on your healthcare in retirement, it's difficult to understand which ones to believe and which ones to not. And they can be really scary. You don't put these in the right context, and I think they become meaningless. And in fact, they can scare you to the point of not doing anything about it. And I think when we look at this properly, you can see it's something that can be afforded. You just need to be mindful to earmark the right amount of funds and the right assets for it, and then it becomes a much more meaningful exercise. So here's one, and this isn't the only one. You can read a lot of them. Fidelity does the number. This is HealthView Services. We have a pretty close relationship with HealthView Services, and I can say firsthand, they've done their homework in this area. They've put together a very accurate number as to what you may experience in retirement as far as healthcare costs. What this represents is a 65-year-old couple and what they're going to spend over the course of their retirement. And I will also say it's a hard number to comprehend a little bit because it takes into consideration inflation. So this number, $663,000 for that 65-year-old couple, when you discount that for future inflation in today's actual dollars, it's about $424,000. So you have to keep that in the back of your mind that this number, even in the beginning, is inflated a little bit because of that dynamic. But you can see at different ages, and this is where it gets a little more scary. If you're a 45-year-old and you're planning for your healthcare costs, you know that your premiums, your out-of-pocket costs are going to need to be about $1.7 million over the course of your retirement. That's scary. That's a large number. If we're looking at the amount of savings that the average retiree has, or people just in general, it was 135, and you're telling me that I'm going to need 1.7, that's a difficult pill to swallow. Now, for our retirees, it's about 424, or you inflate it, 663. And inflation is something we can't overlook because medical inflation has historically been higher than our average rate of inflation for the household goods that we buy. It's about between 4 and 6%, depending on the year. So if you're looking at a number, it's about 5. Now, of course, the last couple of years, we've seen inflation just go crazy. And you know from firsthand experience that a breakfast now costs what a dinner used to. A dinner now costs what a hotel used to. Hotel now costs what a mortgage used to. This happened in a really short period of time. So we have to understand that with healthcare, this is pretty constant. And as we start to see changes and advancement in our healthcare expenses, this could catapult even further. And then you have IRMA, and you have costs that are ingrained into the system like Medicare premiums. That's based on your income. The more income you make, the more you're going to be paying for Part B, the more you're going to be paying for Part D. But we also understand that there are the embedded costs in the healthcare that we do have in retirement. It's basically just your premiums that you're paying. So that's your cost to have the healthcare, and then the money that you have to pay out of pocket. And depending on how you build your Medicare is going to dictate the percentage that's going to ongoing premiums versus out-of-pocket expenses. Because the more you pay in premiums, basically the less you're going to have in out-of-pocket expenses. That's why you're paying a little bit more when we look at Medicare. Where if you want to pay less in premiums, you're probably going to have higher out-of-pocket expenses because these plans are built where you're paying in, you're going to get less value just in general out of them. And here you can see, based on the 3 permutations, we have Medicare Part A, Part B, and a prescription drug plan. 75% are going to premiums, 25% out of pocket. Middle one is you add in your Advantage plan, so you're just going the Advantage route. Very similar, 74%. You're going to have less in premiums, but you're going to have more in out of pocket. And then finally, the Medigap plan, where you're going at the original Medicare and you're picking one of the standardized policies. You're seeing that our premiums go up quite a bit, 81%, but our out-of-pocket expenses are mitigated. So it's all a math equation. It's all a balancing act. You have to understand if you pull one lever, it's going to impact something else. And I think taking the time to run through the numbers is important because here you can see those same 3 expressed as a percent or as a dollar amount for just premiums. The highest cost is that Medigap plan option, and you're talking about $10,200 at the highest. Now, this changes depending on the year and the plans that you go with, but you're going to have less in out-of-pocket expenses, and that's something that we have to take into consideration. This is the wild card variable. We don't know what these are going to be because we don't know which of these that we're going to run into. You don't know when you're going into the hospital. You don't know what you're going to be spending on prescription medications for a chronic condition that you may not have yet. But building it out for the best possible way for you does make a lot of sense. I think prescription drugs are a good litmus test of this. Because we can look at prescription drugs, and this is one of the big pain points for retirees, is variation in prescription drug costs. And we can see the variations here and who has the most difficulty in affording their prescription drug costs, and it's very common sense. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand this. 24% of people have problems affording their prescription drugs, and it's people that are taking a lot of drugs or people that are in very poor health. So there is some wisdom to say if you want to control your healthcare costs in retirement, that having the right lifestyle to mitigate having prescription drugs or chronic conditions is probably the best way to do it. So this is where wealth and health bleed into each other. The healthier we are, the more wealth we're going to have in the future because there's an interchange between the two. Taking it further, adding in some curveballs. This is where it gets really crazy. So we talk about chronic conditions. So prescription drugs are one thing, but when you're in retirement and you get diagnosed with a chronic condition, and I think one that's all too common and 100% lifestyle driven for a lot of people is type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, we add this into the equation. Health Services did a study where they looked at this cost of diabetes, and you can read other ones as well. I've seen ones that say diabetes out of pocket per year, if you're type 2, is going to be $10,000 of additional healthcare expenses. When they ran this survey, what they found is a little bit different. They found a delta of about $3,000. But what's interesting about this is you'll notice the life expectancy for someone with type 2 diabetes, they're passing away in their 80s. They're 80, according to Health Services, at their life expectancy. Someone who doesn't have diabetes, they're projected to make it to 89. And what that means for their healthcare costs, because we don't have this 9 years of running healthcare costs, you actually, on a true dollar amount, have more if you don't have diabetes from a tonnage standpoint for healthcare costs than someone that does. Now, depending on your diagnosis and which one of these conditions occurs, I think diabetes is one that's easy to pick on because it's very prevalent, something that we see a lot. But you add in the prevalence of chronic conditions for people, there certainly is an impact on life expectancy. But you have to understand these other conditions are highly prevalent for retirees. So we have these two rows, and I kind of look at this one as the bad news row. Like the top row, okay, I can manage diabetes, I can probably manage arthritis, but you get on this bottom row and we're talking about heart failure, kidney disease, Alzheimer's. These are the bad ones. You don't want that. But 80% of retirees have at least one of these, and 68% of them have at least two of these. And there's a price tag that comes with each one of them. We do a lot around Alzheimer's and dementia. We have strategic alliances with MIT Age Lab and with Alzheimer's organization. We've spoken cross-country for over a decade on this one topic. And we know pretty well what the financial implications of an Alzheimer's or a dementia diagnosis is. And we know that it's going to cost you around $300,000 just for that one condition. And as you get older, it's very highly correlated with age. If you look at Alzheimer's specifically, age is the one variable that will dictate an Alzheimer's diagnosis more so than anything else. 1 in 10 over the age of 65, 1 in 3 over the age of 85. So the older you get, the more likely you are to run into it. It's also one of those things that you do the planning for it, it makes a world of difference than doing nothing. So I think the bottom line when we talk about Alzheimer's and dementia, get someone else involved, act while there's capacity. It's a progressive disease. We know it's going to stop your ability to plan at some point. Being a big Denver Broncos fan, we all know that they had to sell the Denver Broncos because when he put his plan into place, he was under the question of whether or not he had capacity. So even with the $4.65 billion of full force of the Denver Broncos, they couldn't escape this very simple truth. So that's important. And finally, doing the plan, I think, is extremely important. But we also have to understand that these ceilings only apply to the stated conditions that are covered under the policies. So we can talk about that $663,000 65-year-old couple, but that doesn't show what some people will spend if they have some of those really bad chronic conditions on non-approved treatments. Great documentary I was watching about people who were paralyzed. And the people who were paralyzed were finding any way that they could to get back sensation. And they were following them going to Mexico and getting stem cell treatments. And the amount of money that they were spending on these black market treatments, going into strip malls in Tijuana, Mexico, and spending $200,000 to get something put into their body. They have no idea what it is, but it was costing them $200,000. And even the FDA treatments on some of these things. Think about the higher end cancer treatments. They're tens of thousands of dollars a month. Aduhelm, first FDA treatment on Alzheimer's, which you can read a lot of literature. A lot of people say it doesn't work. A lot of people say it does nothing. But they'll still charge you initially $54,000 per year is what the first price tag was. They cut it down to $26,000 per year. So there's a new one now called Leqembi. That's the newest FDA-approved treatment for Alzheimer's. We'll see if it works, but it's about $20,000 per year. Everything's pointing to Part B covering it because it's an outpatient procedure, because it's an IV. But it's one of those things where, again, once the science starts to catch up, and there's always that cutting edge, and if you're on one side of the edge, you're talking astronomical cost. You're on this side of the edge, you probably have more cost control, but I think most people, if they were in that situation, they may try to skirt out towards that other side of the edge because you may want to do everything you possibly can for yourself or your loved one within the means that you have. So brings us to our final area, long-term care. This is the unstated cost that we talk about, and it's prevalent. We look at how prevalent it is for these types of long-term care, and a lot of people don't understand it's about, according to Health and Human Services, 2/3 of people will need it for about 3 years, so 70%. So this is a very prevalent issue, but there's a disconnect. We also talk about caregiving, which is the unstated cost of long-term care, and it's underestimated. You read the estimates. This says $470,000 for unpaid care. There's another statistic that says $339 billion collectively. So we know it's somewhere in that $339 billion, almost $500 billion per year as a country, but per person, this is extreme. Per person, if you're a caregiver, you're spending over the course of the time that you're providing care, $309,000 of lost wages to provide that care. Now you think about that for a second, it's a lot, but it's also one of those things where you may not realize how much you're actually doing. In talking, obviously just had twins. My parents live in Parker. They're 80 years old. And I know living in Evergreen, the amount of time that I will spend going from Evergreen, because I would be categorized as a caregiver. I provide enough finance. I provide enough chores around the house where I am caregiving. Every time I go back and forth, it's probably a 6-hour proposition. You start to contract that over years of doing it and the wear and tear physically, emotionally, and financially. Yeah, I can believe $309,000. I am the poster child of the sandwich generation because I have those twins and I have my parents that I'm caring for. This is going to become more prevalent because the millennials and Gen Z, they're having their families later in life. You look at the age they're having families. 1970, do you want to guess the age of a first-time mother in 1970? 21. 21. What do you think it is today? It's over 30 for the first time in history. So as we're having our families later in life, and again, it's the millennials and Gen Z that are going to have this, it means that their parents are older when they're having their young children. And as their parents are older, that means that they're probably providing care to both. For the millennials, it's 42%. 42% of millennials have provided care to somebody. For the average worker, it's about 38%. But my guess is as we continue that trajectory out demographically, we'll see much higher percentages of people providing care. And it doesn't take a lot. 92% of care is financial, 60% of it is medical. The financial side can't be overlooked. That is a way that people provide care. And then people are in the dark. This is the paradox. When people are asked, are you going to be providing care? And you see their responses, here you can see, yes, 13%, 16%, 11%, 12%. No, but maybe now in the future, retirees will pick on them, 20%. In reality, they're saying not ever, 68% of the time. So there's an issue here. And we know the percentages and the possibilities of actually being in a care facility get increasingly high as you get older. So we can't overlook that as well. So a high probability of being in a care facility yourself as you age, and a high propensity of providing care as a family member on an unpaid basis to someone that you love. So it's something that worthy to think about, something to plan for. And the dollar cost of it, you look at a year in a semi-private nursing home facility. Does anyone want to guess what that costs currently? Semi-private nursing home facility. So you're sharing a room with somebody. National average. $94,000 per year. If you're in Alaska, it's $378,000. So it's astronomical. Now that's if you're sharing a room. If you want your own room, it's about $108,000 per year. National average. But most people have done no planning for this. And you look at the planning people do for their kids. Does anyone know the most expensive college in the United States? Now it depends on the source that you look at. But if you Google, it is. It's in California. It's Harvey Mudd College in California. Harvey Mudd. So you have to be a very lucky person to go to Harvey Mudd. Only a select people ever get to go there based on admission criteria. $84,000 per year. $84,000 per year. Most people will never get it. Long-term care, $94,000 per year. 70% of people are going to need it. Why don't they plan for it? You look at people planning for their kids. There's Hollywood actors that have literally gone to jail for the way that they plan for their kids. But people don't do it. It's just a black hole in planning. And Medicare doesn't provide anything for it. So parable here. break it down into bite-sized chunks. Perspective is everything. Context is everything. Instead of looking at this as one lump sum charge, because it's not. It's spread over 30 years. And it's not a straight line. It's a parabola. We need to understand that we can break this down to a monthly amount. And we'll just use $300,000 because that's half of that $600,000 figure. 30 years, 360 payments, $800 a month. This is going to be your Social Security check. Most people never actually pay this because it comes directly out of their Social Security check, but budgeting for it is extremely important. And having side buckets for long-term care, having buckets for out-of-pocket expenses make this a lot easier. And even you add in inflation with Social Security, you can see that if it was a one point in time expense, you're at $583,000 present value as opposed to 30. So it's mostly just being mindful about it, budgeting for it, and taking time to plan for it. But it is one of those areas where it does have an impact on our quality of life in retirement. That's really what we're striving towards, is having the best possible life that we possibly can. Healthcare costs are going to continue to go up. Aging is going to continue to go up. Another one that kind of is a little bit of a tangent, but I think directly related, is we don't really know what inflation in medicine is going to look for, because just like the rest of society, doctors are aging. There's a shortage of doctors in the United States. If you look at the demographics, 50%, more than 50% of our doctors are already over age 50. 65, 31% of our doctors are over 65. 12% are over the age of 70. That has some downstream impact on patients. You're probably more likely to see a physician's assistant nowadays than an actual MD. So the quality of care that you're getting might be less. If you want to have the MD, you're probably paying for more. And as they get older, the MDs become susceptible to the same ailments that we have. I've read countless stories where a doctor performed surgery on a Tuesday, forgot where the office was on a Wednesday, fell asleep during surgery, performed surgery in the wrong hemisphere of the brain. So these aging issues, pilots, doctors, these are things that they're becoming scarce, and it's going to have impact on us. The demographics are going to have impact as well. But our goal is to try and hopefully allocate things in a proper way that we don't have susceptibility to those issues. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming out, spending some time with us, and I'll turn it over to Carl for some closing thoughts. And I told you it was meticulously researched and sourced. He did a really good job of creating his bibliography. But,
hey, great job, Ryan. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. That was great. And, that's really important for us. Actually, there's a lot of data in there, and we'll parse that out. We'll share it with everybody over the internet. Our email newsletter and on the website as well.